Oh man, we are just living in the desolation of the real right now, aren't we?
Welcome to the desert of the real.
Hello interwebs, I hope you are all doing well, and I have put on my very snazzy Matrix jacket despite it being over 80 degrees here in Los Angeles right now, because I want to take a brief moment to talk about the current in development Matrix 5 film. And it may seem a little weird that I want to talk about Matrix 5 right now, considering that it is so early in its development cycle. They don't even have a script yet, and the only real announcement that we've gotten is that Goddard, who is the writer of numerous movies, including the recently released and well-received movie Project Hail Mary, is currently slated to write and direct the film. But that's actually exactly why I want to talk about the Matrix movie, especially also because Goddard did an interview with Variety around Project Hail Mary, and he gave a brief little update about the Matrix. And obviously, as a trans person, and B, as a huge fan of the Matrix movies, I have a lot of thoughts about what a Matrix 5 would even mean nowadays, and what I would A, want out of it, and why I have a lot of misgivings with a Matrix 5 movie even being made, and with Goddard behind the helm of the film. Even though, and I will say this right up front, I am someone who actually likes Goddard and a lot of his writing. And on top of that, it should also be mentioned, just given everything that's going on with Warner Brothers right now, there's a lot of, let's just say, production hurdles that this movie will have to go through to even get made, considering that Warner Brothers is currently going through a merger with Paramount, of all places. So who the hell even knows if this movie is going to be made? But considering it is in development, I just want to at least share a few thoughts that I have had around the movie. But let's just address the elephant in the room right up front, which is, why are they even making a Matrix 5 at all? We do not need a Matrix 5 movie. It's not something that is necessary, and is clearly only being made just because Warner Brothers wants to wring even more out of its IP. Like, this is just a very cynical enterprise. It is literally just a company coming in saying, we want to wring more out of this IP, which is just something we've seen over and over and over again. But it's even more egregious in the case of The Matrix, because the most recent Matrix movie, the 2021 movie Matrix Resurrections, directed by Lana Wachowski, was about this. The first third of the movie was overtly about Warner Brothers and Hollywood media just in general regurgitating IP just to make it a cash cow without actually caring about the artistic integrity behind the film.
Things have changed, the market's tough. I'm sure you can understand why our beloved parent company, Warner Brothers, has decided to make a sequel to the trilogy.
What?
They informed me they're gonna do it with or without us.
I thought they couldn't do that.
Oh, they can.
And on top of that, that movie was, let's say, just not critically well received and did not do well at the box office. Despite the fact that, frankly, I think it is a really great movie. Actually, one of my favorite of the Matrix movies overall. I think it was a really wonderful film that many people said was cynical and hated itself and hated that it existed. But I personally think it was not cynical, nor did it hate itself. It hated the system that forced the movie to come into being, because Lana Wachowski was told that they were going to make a Matrix 4 with or without her. And so she decided to do it anyway. She Thanos'd it and said, I'm going to do it myself. And so she hated the system that made her have to make the movie. But it was not cynical overall. In fact, it was a very hopeful film that said, despite the fact that we are still living within the Matrix, that we are still living within a very capitalist system that is going to continually try to regurgitate things that we used to care about and try to cynically just wring every piece of nostalgia out of something to try to just get as much money out of us, we still can have hope. We still can fight back. We still can create something beautiful and new. And also on top of that was a movie that commented upon the failures of the earlier Matrix films and how they had been claimed by the right wing with things like the red pill narrative, because so many right-wing people latched onto Neo as this symbol of masculine strength, that, you know, it's just, you just need to be the one, you just need a strong dude and win the Matrix, rather than taking down the systemic problems that caused the Matrix to exist in the first place. And the movie was about saying, like, no, it's not about being the strong dude like Neo, but in fact, it's about forming community and that you get strength through your connection to others. That was a large part of what this movie was saying, and it was not cynical at all. But that was a message that just did not do well for numerous reasons. A, I think that that is just a message that is lost on many people, given how meta the movie was and how nuanced I think a lot of that, what it was trying to say. And I think a lot of people just missed that. And a lot of people just saw the surface level of the movie, which was a movie that had bad CGI, didn't have a lot of action films, depowered Neo, and said, oh, well, this is just a bad movie for those aesthetic reasons, when in many cases, those aesthetic choices and creative choices were the point of the movie if you looked thematically deeper at the film. Again, I don't think it's a perfect movie. There are issues that I have with the film, but certainly it is a movie about all of those issues, as well as pushing forward the transgender metaphor that was core to so much of the Matrix right from the beginning. While the Wachowskis have talked about that they may not have been overtly conscious of the fact that they were putting transgender metaphors into the original Matrix, it is something they have spoken about after the fact, that it was something that was very, very core to what the movie is, that there is a transgender metaphor of someone realizing that something is wrong, taking literal pills to be able to change who they are and their perception of reality, to break out of the assigned role for them that has been assigned them by society. And certainly many, many other nuances within that narrative that relate to a trans experience. And the Matrix Resurrections continue that even more overtly, where you had a character who was transgender coded, if not transgender explicitly within the film, who said that they looked at Neo and were inspired by him to become the person that they are today.
You won't remember me, but a long time ago you changed my life. When you leapt off another roof. Back then I was just like any other copperton, pretending my life. Until I looked up and I saw you. It was a different you, but I saw the real you. Just a second before you leapt. And you never fell.
Which is something that many trans people, especially of my generation, saw in The Matrix. That we watched The Matrix and said, oh, I feel something here, and that helped me uncover who I was as a trans person and come out. So that was a very overt intention with the movie, to continue not only these anti-capitalist themes and speak to the nostalgic IP-driven Hollywood system right now as well, but also to continue those transgender themes and metaphors. It's why I really like The Matrix Resurrections overall, even though its creation was very cynical, because it is a movie that itself got through that cynicism and ended up being something that was very meaningful, I think. Even despite all the things that were arrayed against it to make it not be that. But I say all of that to say that I look at Matrix 5 and I go, this is just that cynical enterprise. Again, it is just trying to wring more out of IP that has expressly talked about how that is a bad thing and ultimately deflates and ruins meaning from works of art. But again, that's just what Hollywood is going to do. So if we're going to accept on its face that The Matrix 5 is just going to be made, even though I personally think it shouldn't be made, but if we're going to accept that it is going to be made, then I still have more thoughts on the film. Because like I said, right now, the person attached to write and direct the movie is Drew Goddard. And to reiterate, I actually really like Drew Goddard overall. You know, certainly I've had my issues with him. He was attached to that movie World War Z, which has, let's just say, very problematic politics, especially if we look at it right now in terms of what's going on in Israel-Palestine, though that is certainly something that is part of the books as well. If you read Max Brooks' original World War Z book, that is part of that original book. So certainly I'm not saying that I think he is a writer that I've had no issues with. And also I think he's written some bad things too, like he was involved in writing an episode of The Defenders show, which was frankly, I think, not all that great. But he has been involved in a lot of things that I have really liked and I think are actually really good. He was involved in the Daredevil show, the original Netflix one that I thought was really solid. He just recently wrote Project Hail Mary, as well as the other Andy Weir movie, The Martian, both of which I think are really, really great. I really liked both of those films. He was involved in Lost, Cabin in the Woods, Cloverfield, all things that I've generally really liked. And on top of that, I will even give him some credit. In his interview with Variety, he even stated he liked The Matrix 4. Now, that just may be Hollywood bullshit. He may have actually hated it, but you know, when you're interviewed in something like Variety, you're not going to make enemies. You're not going to try and say something that will make the Wachowskis or other folks hate you. So you're going to be like, yes, I loved it. It was great, even if it didn't do well at the box office. But I don't think he needed to do that. And I think I would take him at his word that he ultimately did like The Matrix 4 and has a lot of respect for those movies and all of the films and was emotionally moved by them and wants to do well by their legacy. And yet, I do not want him to be working on a Matrix 5. And I have numerous reasons for that. The most overt and obvious one is the fact that he isn't trans. Now, I already know people have already running down to the comments, well, what, you just want to, you just want a trans person to be forced in there. Why can't a cis dude write something? You just want DEI, blah, 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 blah. But I do have very real reasons for saying that. Like I said, the Matrix movies, despite the fact that they were never allowed to be overtly trans, for numerous reasons, just like Blue in The Matrix Resurrections was not allowed to be an overtly transgender character, nor was the character of Switch allowed to be a character that switched between boy and girl representations in and out of the Matrix in the original Matrix movie, like the Wachowskis wanted them to be. But they are movies that are at their core very, very trans in their ethos. And I worry that someone like Drew Goddard will not capture that element of it that I think is so essential to what The Matrix is. That these are themes and ideas that are so central to these movies that to have a cis person writing the film, I'm not saying that they couldn't. I certainly know cis people who have written trans characters and trans media or media that resonates with trans people. And I certainly think it is quite possible that he could do it and someone else could do it, but I think the chances of that being the case are much harder. And that's, again, not to say he's not a good writer that I don't have some level of respect for, but there is a perspective that I think he just does not have, that he may be able to empathize with, he may even be able to overtly relate to. I mean, a lot of the reasons that The Matrix did so well was because the overall transgender metaphor at the foundation of The Matrix was something that so many people can relate to, feeling out of place and out of sorts and not like they fit the role that was assigned to them. That is an experience that I think many people relate to, not just trans people, but it is one that is so on the surface and so emotionally visceral for so many trans people, given how much we gender people in our culture and how overt it is when we are dealing with it, that I don't necessarily know if it's going to be as immediately accessible for someone like Drew Goddard to be able to create with. Again, not to say that he can't, but I do worry that that won't be something that he will be able to fully capture. Again, maybe he will. But even if he was able to fully capture that, the other element of this is just, again, the representational aspect of this. Because I think that The Matrix is something that really needs to be, at the very least, directed by a trans person and really should have a lot more trans people, both in front of and behind the camera, considering how important it is to transgender culture, especially in the mainstream. The Matrix, arguably, is the most prominent trans-created work ever made in America and by an American system. There have certainly been things that have been important, that have gotten some mainstream appeal, that have featured transgender people or been made by transgender creatives. Laverne Cox, for example. But The Matrix, I think, is one of the biggest. And again, the trans aspects of it are very much a core part of what the movie is. And I think as a result of that, considering how important The Matrix is to the trans community, because it is something that is made by us, made about us, made for us, and has been so influential in transgender culture and community, I think it needs to be something that still stays within the transgender community. Now, I'm going to make a comparison here, but I want to be very clear right up front that I am not saying that this is a one-for-one comparison. I'm going to talk about certain aspects of this, but this is not intended to be a one-for-one because the context of these two films are very, very different, but I do think there is a worthwhile comparison to be made here. But I want to ask all of you out there, how would you feel, for example, if a Black Panther movie was directed by a white director? Again, I want to be very clear here that I am not saying that the experiences of the trans community and the Black community are one-for-one. Certainly there's a lot of overlap in that we are both oppressed and marginalized by a capitalist, white supremacist, and colonial culture. And certainly that goes back all the way to the beginning of American culture and also the fact that there are Black trans people as well. So there's overlap even within our communities, but also like the histories of our two communities in terms of how we are oppressed is very, very different. So I'm not saying that this is a one-for-one like comparison in terms of the communities. What I am trying to get at here though, is that Black Panther is a movie, the marvel of it aside, Black Panther, especially the original one, is a movie that was so important to Black culture and featured so much of Black culture from America, as well as African diaspora culture, as well as African culture specifically within that film. You know, and it was so important to Black people around the world that it would just be, to put it mildly, deeply problematic if it was a movie that had been handed off to a white director. If the franchise in the third movie was given to a white director. To give that franchise to a white director would be to fundamentally betray what those movies are about and whose perspective they should center, both behind the scenes and in front of the camera. Again, I am not saying that this is a one-for-one, but to a degree, this is how I feel about the Matrix movies. Those are movies that, yes, while they are relatable to so many people, while they are certainly something that I think anyone could get into, relate to, and should get into and relate to, they are movies that are so effused within the transgender community and so important to the transgender community that I find it honestly, frankly, upsetting to not give this movie to a transgender person to write and direct. And on top of that, if we're just looking systemically at Hollywood, there are so few opportunities for transgender people to get to be in the director's chair and or write a movie of the size and scale of a Matrix film. Outside the Wachowskis, I cannot think of a transgender, or at least an out transgender director who has reached their level in terms of the movies that they have been able to make in their career. That's not to say that there isn't transgender directors doing great work, but none, I think, at least to my awareness, have reached that level. For a trans person to be able to direct the Matrix movie could be life-changing, not only for that director or creative, but for transgender people overall to get a chance to represent ourselves in something so big and so huge. Could be so meaningful for the transgender community and for representation, generally speaking. Now, obviously, Hollywood does not give a shit, especially right now, considering that so much of Hollywood is continually capitulating to conservative right-wing narratives around both trans people and just generally speaking when it comes to our culture. And this is even more evident in the fact that Warner Brothers is about to be bought by Paramount, which has even more than most been capitulating to the growing fascistic sentiment here in the United States, as we've seen with the hiring of Barry Weiss and all of that jazz. So I don't necessarily expect this argument to really be meaningful to anyone in an executive position over at Warner Brothers, but it is at least one that is worth making and worth at least stating, even if no one's gonna give a shit, at least in a position of power to do something about it. I personally would fucking love to see The Matrix 5 as written and directed by Jane Schoenbrunn, the director of the I Saw the TV Globe movie. I think Jane Schoenbrunn would do an amazing job with The Matrix, and that would do so much for Jane's career going forward. And they have certainly shown that they have the chops to direct something like that, both creatively and just skill level as a director. And so that's why I wanted to talk about this, especially since it's so early in pre-production. Again, nothing against Drew Goddard necessarily. I don't know enough about him on a personal level, but, you know, as a creative, I have some level of respect for him, and I think he's made some great work, including Project Hail Mary that just came out. But I do not think he should be the one in charge of a Matrix 5. But all that being said, I would love to hear your thoughts about all of this. Do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm wrong? Do you think, and I think this would be my take as well if we were being honest about it, do we even need a Matrix 5 at all? I personally think no, but if we're going to get it, what do you think about what I've said? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the down below. But beyond all of that, my friends, I hope you live long and prosper.